Hi, I'm Alyona Minkovski, and you're watching Salon Talks. The need for women's empowerment and support for sexual assault survivors didn't just appear in 2017, but these issues did finally get the public attention that they deserve. So how do we make sure that moving into the future, we see actual change and consistent work in this space? Well, the best people to ask are those who have already spent years advocating for these issues. So joining me now is Tarana Burke, civil rights activist, a sexual assault survivor, the senior director at the Girls for Gender Equity, and the founder of Me Too. So Tarana, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. And I mean, there's been so much going on, obviously, and for anyone out there who still isn't totally familiar with your story and how you've really dedicated your life to this for so many years, can you just briefly explain what you've been working on? All, like I said, before this kind of explosion of this being part of the public mindset?
Sure. A little over 10 years ago, a friend and I had founded an organization. We actually founded that organization first, Just Be Inc., for black and brown girls in Alabama. And in doing that work, we encountered so many little girls who were part of our program who had experiences with sexual violence, and that really resonated with me because of my own experience, and I decided that we needed to do something proactively to help these young people find spaces for healing. And so Me Too was sort of born out of that and out of the long-standing need I had to do something about sexual violence in my community.
So how do you fuse together Me Too, your vision of it, and the kind of broader hashtag movement that we see happening now? What do you see as, the contrast or the comparisons between them?
There's not a ton of difference because the movement around Me Too is really about survivors connecting with other survivors, right? The idea of using the words and using that phrase is so that people who have these experiences understand that they're not alone. And that's really at its core what it's about. It's not about anything it's not about some of the things that we've seen in the media. So people try to make distinctions between this is about sexual harassment and this is about, your stuff is about sexual violence or sexual abuse. And my response to that is that sexual violence is a huge spectrum, right? And on that spectrum is both sexual harassment and sexual abuse. And so anything that makes people vulnerable to being harassed or abused or attacked is something that falls under the purview of Me Too.
How do you deal with, I feel like some of the conversation has devolved into trying to pit people against each other, think piece after think piece about how we respond to Aziz Ansari, right, and the different levels of people grading, rape versus sexual harassment versus groping versus this or that. How do you respond to people that want to kind of, categorize it that way?
I think it's good that we're talking about all these things. They need to be parsed out. I mean, we are talking about we're coming from a time when people didn't want to have those conversations at all. And now we're actually having conversations where we're digging into and debating what is what and what type of behavior causes this. And we're talking about rape culture on a regular basis. And we're talking about the sexual harassment that women or people are subjected to in various institutions and across industries. So I think it's okay for us to continue having these conversations. Everybody's not going to agree to everything, right? We're all not going to stay on the same page. But I feel like as long as dialogue continues to happen, that we're making progress.
And of course, dialogue is one thing, but tangible actions, tangible effects are a completely different thing. So how do people transfer that, into actually helping those who are assault survivors or actually trying to change the culture?
Well, I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I think dialogue is tangible. I think sometimes we dismiss the power of having conversation, the power of having in-depth dialogues between one another. People's lives are changed by having consistent dialogue. The culture's changed. We're having dialogue, right?
Yeah.
In the media, when we have these conversations in media, when we have these conversations in our communities, it helps to shift the culture. So I think those are concrete things that are happening that have real tangible results. But I know obviously people want more than dialogue, and I think beyond that first of all, Me Too is not the start of us dealing with sexual violence in our communities, right, or in the country. There are decades of work that precede this, and there are organizations that have been around for a long time who are doing this work, and some of them are resources right now. And the truth is, some of them are the reason why we have gaps in resources and why we need people on the ground who are working to do this work. And so what I feel like my lane is, and the work of the Me Too movement, is to help people to figure out where those gaps are and to find resources for people who don't have resources. So for instance, there are rape crisis centers that are overrun right now, that don't have the budgets to hire new people, that don't have the capacity to go out in the community and to create new programming. Well, I believe in the power of survivors. I believe that we have the answers, and I believe that we can take leadership in our own healing process. And so, what would it look like to have healing circles in communities that are facilitated by other survivors? So those are kind of tangible things. And on the flip side to that, I also believe in community action. And I think that it takes all of us doing all kind of things all the time to really move the needle even a little bit around sexual violence. And so, I recommend people taking small actions in their communities. I think if you are a parent association or a group of parents who can get together and have a meeting at your child's school and find out what the vetting process is in the school, right? There are all these people in our schools that interact with our children all day long, and we don't know how they're hired. We don't know what kind of background checks are done. We don't know what the vetting process is. Maybe it's a group of women at work and you don't know what your sexual harassment policy is, right? So there are small ways that you can just empower yourself with knowledge or push back against things that don't make your community safe.
And obviously everyone's experience is unique, but Absolutely. For you, what helped you heal? What were the things that you found to be the most important, the most critical in that process? The most critical thing, when I started my healing process, was the day that I realized that I wasn't the only person in the world this had happened to. I actually read, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou when I was really young, and it was the first time I had even not in real life, but even had connection to a character who had experienced something like I experienced. And I thought that was fake. I thought this was in a book. It wasn't a real thing. But when I started meeting other people who had the shared experience, and those people understood there's all kind of quirks and nuances and ways that we live our lives once we've experienced this trauma that feel very isolating. And it was liberating to me to know that there were other people like me. And then over time, when by reading and connecting with other people and having really these empathetic relationships with people, that I knew that they deeply understood, even if they didn't have the same experience, they deeply understood where I was coming from. That was a big part of my healing process. And then at some point, because I had an organizing background and I had been orientated to action in my community, like I grew up knowing that I had the power to make changes in my community. At some point, I put that together with the thought that, well, if I have the power to make changes in my community, the thing I want to change is this, meaning I want to do something about sexual violence. And that was actually a part of my healing process too, right? Like the idea that I have the power, or in some way I can affect another young girl, and another young girl won't have the years of pain that I carried. Like if I can start you on your healing process at 12 or 14 or 17, you know what I mean? That means that you have that many less years to get to this other place. So those are the things that heal. And I'm still in the healing process, right? It's ongoing forever. Those are the things that make me feel like I'm on that journey. It's earlier today, I was doing another interview here in the studio with an actress who's a sexual assault survivor, and she was telling her story, and we were talking about the Golden Globes and how I think that for a lot of people, a lot of women especially, it was kind of shocking that none of the men said anything and spoke up. And so I think that's one of the big questions that a lot of men even maybe want answered themselves, is they're not sure exactly what to do and how to act right now, and what do you say to guys as to the role that they should play in all of this?
I get this question. I don't know, maybe it shouldn't bother me as much as it does, but this question always bothers me because I just don't believe that you have to be told how to treat another human being. I think at our core, we know how to treat people. When men interact with other men, I've never been in a situation where before going into a meeting, one man said to another, hey, now when you get in here, don't say anything lewd, don't talk about his penis. Like, they don't do that. They know inherently to treat each other with respect. They know each other, with confidence and authority. Like, that's how they interact. It should be no different. The problem is they've been socialized, and we live in a country that men are socialized, and they are in a way they're steeped in patriarchy. Misogyny is all around them. Rape culture is perpetrated, is all around us. And so it creates this dynamic where they feel like well, I don't know what to say, because they're used to this particular kind of behavior. It's just socialization, right? And I feel like in anything, at some point, we have had all kind of different shifts in culture where we've had to treat groups of people differently, right? From race. Like, there was a time in our country when it was okay to talk about people of a certain race, like people who were not white, a certain way, and then that shifted, the culture shifted. Now it still happens, obviously, right? But it's not the cultural norm has shifted around that. And I think men have to take responsibility for their behavior. Women have to take responsibility for our behavior, right? Patriarchy isn't just a man thing, we buy into it too. But we have to take responsibility for our behavior and start with the basic premise that you have to respect another person's dignity. This is real, like the thing that happens when there's, even in sexual harassment, right? When a person I'll take the instance of men and women just for argument's sake, knowing that it happens across the spectrum, but mostly it happens to women. When a woman is in a place where you're at work, or you're in your church, or you're someplace where you feel comfortable, or you feel confident, and somebody harasses you, they touch you in a way that's demeaning, or they talk to you in a way that's demeaning, that chips away at your dignity. And we're driven, our dignity is something that we need. We're driven by that, right? We use that as a driving force in our lives. And so I think it's a very simple, treat people the way you want to be treated kind of thing, right?
The fundamentals.
It's fundamental. Yeah. Like, that's why the question bothers me. I'm like, this is fundamental. And not because you have a wife, and not because you have a daughter or a sister or a mother.
Because you're a human being.
Because you're a human being, right? There's a way that you should respect me because I'm a human being. I don't walk up to men and just grab them by the crotch or do, you know.
But you know who does? Right? I mean, look, it's the contrast of having this entire moment happen, you know, and maybe it had to happen now with someone like Donald Trump in office. But what message do you think that sends to the rest of the world, too, as they're following Me Too and following, you know, the kind of accountability that's now being brought onto so many men in positions of power, and at the same time we have Donald Trump as the president? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's a very clear message. I think that people can follow the dots, right? You have a president who is a self-described sexual predator. I mean, he said it himself. Like, this is what he described is sexual assault, and he said he does it on a regular basis. So you have the President of the United States, or the free world, as we say, who is describing himself in this way. I think for a lot of people, that was a bridge too far. It's like, okay, you know, we can put up with a lot of things, and although he was still elected, and he was...
I thought that would be disqualifying. I thought it was over when that moment happened.
I did, but I think because it wasn't the thing for a lot of women, for many women, and for men as well, and for people across the gender spectrum, I think people know that we've gone too far, and we have to take this into our own hands. And so if there's any benefit to having this person as a president, is that I think it has emboldened people to take these things into their own hands, and to take to the streets, and to take to, you know, there's this record number of people running and women running for office. So we're having sort of an opposite backlash, I think, to his presidency, and a lot of it has to do with women, really, and I've said this before, like finding a frequency. It's not that we haven't been talking. It's not that we haven't been organizing and pushing back against sexual violence and talking about these things for years. It's that I think that we have finally all found a frequency where people can hear us.
You were invited to go to the State of the Union, actually, by Representative Jackie Speer, who also has very much been been vocal about sexual harassment and assault on Capitol Hill, but you just chose not to go. Why is that?
I did, and it had nothing to do with Representative Speer. You know, I think she's doing a great job, and she is really out to represent the women on Capitol Hill and make sure that Capitol Hill is, first and foremost, is a safe space for women who work there. But for me, and I wasn't the only one invited. I was invited along with two of the other women who were on the red carpet with me. Ai-jen Poo, who is the executive director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and Monica Ramirez, who is from Alianza, the Farm Worker Women's Association. So, and we were all invited, and we got together and collectively decided to decline. I don't know that it serves my purpose to sit at the State of the Union and listen to Donald Trump deliver an address that I know is counter to what I believe and counter to where I think the country should be going. And so what we decided to do instead is put together a counter event So it'll be the state of our union. Because as you were saying, what you were speaking to earlier, women are coming together in this country as individuals, but also as collectives, as organizations, and working across industry lines and working across different lanes. So there's domestic workers and farm workers and restaurant workers. There are people who are, Planned Parenthood organization, Moms Rising, all these organizations that have similar outlooks but the common thread is we support women and women identified folk, and we support justice and equality and equity for those groups. And we know, we've always known, but I think now in a more real way, that our collective strength is way more powerful than our individual strength. And so we're going to have the State of Our Union event at the Washington Press Club on the same day as the State of the Union.
Mm-hmm. And also, a big part of this too has been the discussion that there hasn't been enough collective unity between white women and black women who are survivors, and amplifying those voices. Do you think that there's been progress there?
Well, and it's not just black women, not non-white women, right?
Women
and
of
so,
color, yeah.
and queer folks and trans women, and just there's been a lot of people left out of the general conversation. And so I think one of the things that I say when I have interactions with white women, and particularly white women who are engaged in this moment, is that, we talk about what privilege looks like and what intersectionality really means. It's like everybody's favorite word nowadays, but I think that people don't quite understand what it means. And it's not just like the intersection of you're black and I'm white. It's I represent several things. I'm black, I'm a woman, some folks are queer, that's another identity. It's where all of your identities meet. And it's respecting all of those identities and understanding that all of those identities make up who you are as a person. And when I come into a room, I come into the room I come as a black woman, I come as a survivor, I come as a mother, I come as a worker, so I come bringing all these things, and I need to work with people who can respect all of those things and embrace all of those things. So I hope that there's some progress being made, and I think we've seen some of that happening. There's still a lot more progress that has to happen. We've seen in the instance when Harvey Weinstein's story broke, and it was all this stream of actresses coming forward saying they had these experiences, and only 2 women who've received any backlash publicly were Lupita Nyong'o, who Harvey Weinstein had himself denied, and then when Lena Dunham came out and wrote the letter against
I forget the
Aurora,
name, but yeah,
Aurora Pernu, saying that she supported the perpetrator, right? And so that speaks volumes to people. And I think that although Lena Dunham doesn't speak for so many white women, I know that she's not the representative of feminism to so many white women, but it is a representative, and it does speak volumes to people, and it makes us feel like, see, every time we have some progress, this is what happens. So. But I feel like a lot of dialogue is happening nowadays, and I feel like the dialogue is becoming more honest and transparent.
In terms of people like Lena Dunham, it's celebrity voices also are the voices that just happen to be and tend to be amplified. And so, but now you've talk to us about what this last year has been like for you, just in terms of being on the red carpet and being on the cover of Time magazine. Doing countless interviews like this on the other part, on the inside of the cover. It's, just from a personal perspective, obviously there's the larger goal that you have, and the larger movement that you're a part of. But what has it been like for you?
It's strange. It's a strange existence. I am not a person who seeks the spotlight or and being in the spotlight is not really integral to my work. It's not something that I felt, was something I needed in order to be successful in this work. And it's very funny. People say to me all the time now, oh, what does it feel like to be successful finally after 10 years? And I'm like, I think that if you talk to some of my kids, they probably think that I was a little successful. But this has been, it's been a catch-22, right? And on the one hand, it gives me this larger platform to talk about things that people don't want to talk about. It gives me a wider audience to talk about sexual violence and to keep talking about survivors. And I feel like some people probably think I do it ad nauseum, but that's really important to me, that we take the focus off of perpetrators and really have it on survivors. So it gives me a chance to do that, right? I can sit in places and talk to people like you. On the other hand, I worry about, like, I don't want to be a celebrity for this. You know what I mean? This is a weird thing to be known for, like sort of famous for. And I think that it can be a cover for people sometimes, right? It's very easy to celebrate me without interrogating what I represent, right? So you can say, oh, Tarana Burke, I'm so happy for you, and people say congratulations all the time. And I get that, and I respect it, and I'm really humbled by it. But also, I think that if we get caught up in celebrating who I am as an individual, but we don't interrogate what's happening with sexual violence around the world, then there's no point in me being known. Right? I don't have any real special talents.
I don't know. I feel like maybe you can show something off here.
I don't have any, like, I can tell a joke or two, but so it's been an interesting ride, and trying to balance those two things out. The Golden Globes was, in the organizing space, we call it an action, right? The Golden Globes wasn't just to be on the red carpet and whatever. It was thought out, strategic, and planned, and even then I had to think about what are the consequences of me being dressed up and on the red carpet, lavishing in all of this publicity. But if I can do that and use them, not like I sacrifice myself, but if I can use that as a time to talk about this issue, then I think that's worth it.
And you're allowed to enjoy a little bit too.
And it's been
walk
fun.
that red carpet. And so finally, what's next then? So here we are. It's it's 2018. We use these ways of measuring time, for better or for worse. But it's an indicator for us. What is the next phase that we need to move into?
Right now, what's really important to me is shifting the narrative about what Me Too is. There are people who are taking Me Too, the idea of Me Too, and running with it in all kind of plays. I've heard of new hashtags. There's some people who are trying to start a Pay Me Too hashtag, which is, I'm like, we can never really dig into talking about sexual violence before people try to change the subject and talk about something else. So one, we're trying to shift the narrative away from how people are defining it now. It's not about taking down powerful men. It's not about focusing on perpetrators. It's not just about sexual harassment in the workplace, although that's a part of it. It is about interrupting sexual violence and finding resources to help survivors. It is about survivors creating a global community to help each other start a healing process. It's really not even about trauma. It's about joy. It's about the ways that we have to cultivate joy in our life so that we can move past the trauma, or because people may take offense to say moving past it, because you don't necessarily move past it, but it's so you can find alternatives to that, right? So that doesn't define you, so that you don't stay steeped in the place you were when you first said Me Too. Like, that's really important to me, to shift that narrative, and we need to stop talking about it in this way. Oh, this is the end of the Me Too movement, or look what the Me Too movement did now. And it's like, if you're talking about Me Too and you're not talking about and centering people who have survived some sort of sexual violence, then you're having the wrong conversation.
All right. Well, Tarana, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure to have you here. Again, my guest today, Tarana Burke. I'm Alyona Minkovski. You've been watching Salon Talks. And you can tune into all of Salon's TV shows by liking Salon on Facebook and opting in for notifications, and you'll get updates when we're live.